He was right about everything. They killed him anyway. June 20, 1947, Beverly Hills, California. Benjamin Siegel sat in the living room of his girlfriend Virginia Hill's rented mansion on Linden Drive, reading the Los Angeles Times in the warm evening air. Outside, the Pacific summer night was quiet, elegant, everything that Siegel himself aspired to be. He'd spent his whole life clawing out of the poverty of New York's Lower East Side, fighting his way to wealth and power and the kind of luxury that immigrant kids only dreamed about. He'd made it. He was wearing expensive clothes in an expensive house in the most glamorous city in America. And then a rifle appeared outside the window. 9 shots, 5 connected. Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, though nobody who valued their life called him that to his face, died in Virginia Hill's living room, his eye shot from its socket, his famous face destroyed by bullets from a weapon nobody ever officially identified. 3,000 miles away in Naples, Italy, Lucky Luciano received the news. He'd known Bugsy Siegel since they were children running together on the Lower East Side. 3 boys, Luciano, Siegel, Mayor Lansky, who'd built a friendship and an empire together. And now one of those boys was dead, shot by order of the organization they'd all helped create. Some historians believe Luciano's approval was sought before the killing. Others think it happened without him. What's certain is that Bugsy Siegel died because of a hotel. A magnificent, visionary, catastrophically over-budget hotel in the Nevada desert that nobody believed in except the man who built it. That hotel was the Flamingo, and after Siegel's death, it became the foundation of Las Vegas as we know it today. But the real story was never only about the money. To understand what happened to Bugsy Siegel, you need to understand who he was within the world Lucky Luciano built. Siegel wasn't just an enforcer or a soldier. He was part of the inner circle, one of the founding generation, a man who'd been present at the creation of modern organized crime. He and Luciano had grown up together, worked together, built together. He was part of the original trio that also included Mayor Lansky, the childhood friends who turned poverty and ambition into criminal empire. But Siegel was different from Luciano and Lansky in crucial ways. Where Luciano had strategic patience and Lansky had financial genius, Siegel had something harder to categorize and more dangerous to carry: vision. Raw, unfiltered, impractical vision that saw possibilities others couldn't imagine and refused to accept that those possibilities were impossible. He was brilliant and volatile in equal measure, capable of charm that could light up a room and rage that could empty one just as quickly. His good looks and personality had made him a celebrity of sorts in Los Angeles, where he'd moved in the 1930s to oversee the mob's West Coast operations and wire services that fed race-track betting information to bookmakers across the country. He dined with movie stars, dated socialites, and moved through Hollywood society with an ease that seemed almost miraculous for a kid who'd grown up in desperate poverty. And sometime in the early 1940s, driving through the Nevada desert, he saw it. What happened next changed the meaning of everything that came before. Nevada had legalized gambling in 1931, but Las Vegas was barely more than a dusty railroad town with a few modest casinos catering primarily to locals and passing travelers. The Las Vegas Strip, the glittering corridor of luxury hotels and casinos that the world would eventually know, didn't exist yet. There was scrubland, desert heat, and the beginning of a few modest tourist operations along Highway 91. Siegel saw something nobody else was seeing. Not a modest gambling town, but a destination. A resort city in the desert that would attract visitors from across the country with luxury accommodations, world-class entertainment, and gambling on a scale that hadn't been attempted outside of a few European venues. He envisioned what Las Vegas would become before it existed. He saw the future written in sand. The idea was presented to his partners, Luciano from Italy, Lansky in New York, the assembled mob bosses of the commission. The reaction was mixed. Some saw opportunity, others saw risk. The desert was hot, remote, and hardly seemed like a destination where Americans would spend their vacation money. But Siegel was passionate and persuasive, and the mob had money to invest. They agreed to back the Flamingo Hotel and Casino. The budget started at $1.5 million. That number would prove catastrophically optimistic. The confidence in his presence did not mean certainty existed within him. Construction on the Flamingo began in 1945, and almost immediately everything started going wrong. Siegel had hired a contractor named Del Webb who, by some accounts, didn't understand casino construction. Materials were scarce in the post-war economy. Workers were difficult to find and harder to keep. Siegel himself had no construction experience and made decisions based on aesthetic vision rather than practical engineering. He wanted marble floors, crystal chandeliers, tropical landscaping in the middle of the desert, guest rooms with individual sewer connections, a luxury feature that required enormous amounts of plumbing, a steam room, a health club, a stage for world-class entertainment. Every feature that would make the Flamingo different from the modest casinos along the Strip added cost, and Siegel didn't stop adding features. There were also rumors of theft. Some accounts suggest that Virginia Hill, who managed some of the construction finances, was siphoning money to European bank accounts while Siegel remained unaware or chose not to see it. Other accounts blame contractor overcharges and black market material pricing in the difficult post-war economy. Whatever the cause. Budget exploded. $1.5 million became $3 million, then $5 million, then $6 million. The commission's patience evaporated. For the mob bosses who'd invested, this was no longer a business proposition. It was a money pit that kept demanding more without producing any return. Every meeting where the budget increased was another meeting where Siegel's credibility declined. The men who trusted him with their money were watching it disappear into a desert construction project that kept getting more expensive and kept getting delayed. There were suggestions that Siegel was stealing, that the budget overruns weren't incompetence but fraud, that the money flowing to European banks connected to Virginia Hill was mob investment funds being laundered into personal wealth. Siegel denied everything, but the accusations planted seeds of doubt in men who had built their careers on detecting deception. But there was something no one around him could fully understand. The Flamingo finally opened on December 26, 1946, in a grand ceremony that Siegel hoped would silence his critics and prove his vision. He invited Hollywood celebrities, flew in entertainers, prepared for a triumphant debut that would demonstrate the viability of luxury gambling in the desert. George Raft, a film star and Siegel's close friend, attended. Jimmy Durante performed. The Flamingo was open. It was a disaster. Heavy rains forced some planes carrying guests from Los Angeles to divert. The hotel rooms weren't finished, meaning guests who gambled at the casino had nowhere to stay. The gaming tables bled money, partly because experienced casino staff hadn't been properly recruited, and partly because some players appeared to be cheating with insider help. In its first 2 weeks of operation, the Flamingo lost over $300,000. Siegel closed it temporarily in January 1947 to complete construction. He reopened in March, and this time things were different. The hotel rooms were ready. The staff was better trained. The location began attracting the curious and the adventurous. By spring, the Flamingo was actually making money. Not enough to recoup the investment yet, but enough to suggest that Siegel's vision might eventually pay off. It was too late. He built a world that looked controlled, even while carrying burdens no one could see. The commission had already decided. The exact timeline and who voted for what remains disputed, but the consensus among historians is that by early 1947, the men who'd invested in the Flamingo had concluded that Siegel was either incompetent, dishonest, or both. The overruns couldn't be explained away. The disastrous opening couldn't be forgiven, and the possibility that he'd been stealing from them couldn't be tolerated. In organized crime, stealing from your own people is one of the most serious violations imaginable. It breaks the fundamental compact of trust that makes the whole structure possible. Even a man as connected as Siegel, as beloved by some as he was, couldn't survive the accusation if it was believed by enough of the right people. Mayor Lansky was reportedly devastated. This was his childhood friend, the boy he'd grown up with in poverty, the man who'd fought alongside him through decades of danger. Lansky argued for Siegel's life, presented evidence that the Flamingo was finally showing profit, pleaded for patience. Some accounts suggest he was successful in delaying the decision for months. Others suggest the decision was made above his level of influence and he had no power to stop it. Luciano's position is even less clear, obscured by his exile in Italy and the deliberate destruction of evidence that might have implicated him. What's known is that he was still influential within the commission, that his opinion on major decisions was sought even from across the ocean, and that Siegel's fate was eventually sealed. What people called legendary often began as something deeply personal. On June 20, 1947, someone positioned themselves outside the window of Virginia Hill's house on Linden Drive in Beverly Hills and fired 9 shots with a .30 caliber carbine. Siegel was hit 5 times. He died almost instantly. Virginia Hill was conveniently out of the country. No weapon was ever recovered. No suspect was ever officially charged. The murder of Benjamin Siegel remained officially unsolved, but the timing of what happened next made the motive brutally clear. 20 minutes after Siegel's body was found, 3 men walked into the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas and announced they were taking over. No warning, no transition, just immediate hostile acquisition of the asset that had cost so much and for which Siegel had paid with his life. The mob didn't even wait for his body to be buried before claiming what they considered theirs. And then something remarkable happened. Under new management, with the construction complete and the operation stabilized by Siegel's obsessive attention to detail in his final months, the Flamingo became profitable, then very profitable. The vision that had seemed like madness in the desert was correct: luxury. Gambling attracted wealthy tourists, the entertainment drew crowds. The strip that Siegel had imagined began to fill in around the Flamingo as other investors saw what was possible. The dream he'd died for worked, it just worked for other people. The image was real, so was the silence afterward. Las Vegas became one of the most profitable gambling destinations in the world. The Flamingo was eventually rebuilt and expanded into the iconic resort it remains today. The strip that Siegel envisioned became a boulevard of casino hotels generating billions of dollars annually. His vision, the idea that a luxury resort destination could thrive in the Nevada desert, proved not just viable but transformative. Mayor Lansky continued to profit from Las Vegas casino operations for decades, using the financial networks he and Siegel had built together. Other mob families extracted enormous wealth from the gambling industry Siegel had pioneered. The city that Benjamin Siegel had imagined before anyone else became one of the entertainment capitals of the world. And Siegel, he was buried in Los Angeles without most of his famous friends attending, afraid to be seen publicly mourning a murdered gangster. His grave is in the Hollywood Forever Cemetery. The man who built Las Vegas doesn't even have a prominent memorial in the city his vision created. That absence is its own kind of statement. Las Vegas celebrates its glamour, its excess, its entertainment legacy. It doesn't much celebrate the man who saw all of that before it existed, who drove himself and everyone around him toward a vision that eventually came true, who paid for that vision with his life. Many knew the legend, the gangster who built Las Vegas. The childhood friend of Lucky Luciano and Mayor Lansky, the man shot 9 times in Beverly Hills, but very few understood the hunger that drove him. The immigrant kid from the Lower East Side who wanted more than survival, who wanted to build something magnificent, something that would last, something that would prove the poor Jewish boy from New York could create grandeur in the desert. That hunger came from somewhere much deeper. From the same immigrant ambition that drove Luciano and Lansky, but expressed differently. Where Luciano channeled ambition into organizational structure and Lansky into financial strategy, Siegel channeled his into vision, into the belief that if you could see something clearly enough, want it badly enough, work toward it relentlessly enough, it would exist. He was right. Las Vegas exists. The Flamingo exists. Strip he imagined exists. He just didn't live to see it fully realized. The real story was never only about the murder or the hotel. It was about what the Flamingo represented within the relationship between Luciano, Lansky, and Siegel. 3 boys who'd grown up together, built together, survived together. And then one decision at a time, the organization they'd created chose profit over friendship, structure over loyalty, institutional survival over personal connection. Luciano had orchestrated murders before. He'd eliminated mentors and rivals with calculated precision. But this was different. This was someone from his original circle, his childhood, his foundational relationships. If Luciano approved Siegel's killing, and the historical evidence is ambiguous, it represented the ultimate demonstration of how thoroughly he'd subordinated personal feeling to organizational logic, or perhaps it represented something darker, the inevitable endpoint of building power on violence. When you create structures that can authorize murder for business reasons, you lose the ability to fully control who those structures target. Not even friendship from childhood, not even shared history from the founding of an empire, guarantees protection from the logic of the organization you helped build. Mayor Lansky lived with that knowledge for the rest of his life. He reportedly never fully forgave those responsible for Siegel's death. He maintained his criminal career, made his money, and died wealthy. But somewhere in him, according to people who knew him, was a grief for Benjamin Siegel that never quite healed. And lucky Luciano, in his Italian exile, had lost another piece of the world he'd built. Commissions survived, the families continued, the money kept flowing, but the boy from the Lower East Side who'd seen the future in a Nevada desert was buried in Hollywood while the city he'd imagined grew into something magnificent. He was right about everything, and they killed him anyway. The city rose without him. The dream he paid for with his life became real for everyone except the dreamer. That's the story of Benjamin Siegel, not just the gangster who built Las Vegas, but the visionary who proved that being right isn't enough, that friendship has limits even among those who built empires together, and that sometimes the most powerful organizations destroy their most creative members because they can't distinguish between vision and recklessness until it's too late to apologize. Las Vegas still stands, the Flamingo still operates, and somewhere in the foundation of all that glitter and light is the story of a man who saw it all before it existed and paid the price that visionaries sometimes pay in worlds that value caution over imagination. Lucky Luciano built structures that lasted, but he couldn't always protect the people who helped him build them. And that might be the most human thing about the legend, the friendships that formed the foundation and the losses that left permanent cracks in it.